The sun beat down on the asphalt like a punishment. Heat shimmered above the blistering Texas highway, warping the air into dancing ghosts of nothing. Engines roared past, indifferent to the one vehicle pulled over by the side, a gleaming black sedan with its hood up and its pride melted across the pavement. Inside the car, Brandon Whitaker sat with the air of a man who had never waited before. His button-down shirt clung to his back. His jaw was tight, his phone blinking with no signal, and his knuckles drummed the wheel as if urgency alone could fix the engine. Then, through the haze, a rumble. Not a luxury tow truck. Not an assistant with iced coffee. But a beat-up blue Ford pickup, its paint sun-faded and flaking at the edges. It pulled up ahead of him, and out stepped a woman in dusty coveralls, a grease-streaked rag hanging from her back pocket. She walked with quiet command. Boots crunching gravel. No hurry, no deference. Just the calm of someone who's seen enough broken things to know they all speak the same language. Brandon squinted. "You the mechanic?" She didn't smile. Just wiped her hands and nodded. "Looks like you got yourself overheated." "I'm Rachel." "Pop the hood." Her voice was low, unbothered, but beneath it was something else. Something worn down but still standing. Brandon hesitated, then complied. She leaned in, tools clicking against metal. Her hands moved fast, practiced, careful. He watched her, strangely transfixed. There was something about the way she never looked up, as if fixing this machine mattered more than the man who owned it. A few minutes passed. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she pulled out a busted clamp. "Your radiator hose is split. You've been pushing it too hard. I've got a temporary fix that'll get you to the next town. But after that, you'll need a real replacement." Brandon reached for his wallet. "I'll pay you whatever." "I'm not done yet," she interrupted. He blinked. No one ever cut him off. She kept working, sweat tracing down her temple, mixing with oil and dust. Then, she paused. He followed her gaze, and for the first time, she looked at him. Directly. Her eyes flickered to his hand. Then to his face. Then, his breath caught. Because her hand had lifted to adjust her glove, and in the motion, he saw it, a ring. Not just any ring. A sapphire, set in a thin gold band. The stone slightly chipped. Worn by time. And memory. He staggered a step back. Rachel noticed. She narrowed her eyes. "You okay?" He didn't answer. Couldn't. The heat was no longer the only thing suffocating him. Because decades ago, before the business suits, before his father's empire consumed everything, before the lies, he had given that ring to a girl in a dusty orphanage. A promise ring. Childish, maybe. But sacred. He had never forgotten her. And now, she was standing in front of him, holding his broken car together with nothing but grit and steel. But she didn't recognize him. Not yet. And no one knew, he wasn't just a regular man. The sun was cruel that day, blistering the hood of Rachel's rusted pickup as it rattled toward Monroe Auto Works, its engine coughing like an old man trying to hold on. She didn't care. Not today. The radio was off, the windows cracked just enough to let in the dry Texas air, and her hands, calloused and lined with old oil, gripped the wheel like it might escape her. Outside, the town blinked past in pieces. A shuttered diner. A sagging overpass. The shell of the old train station that used to whistle at dusk. Everything seemed to have fallen asleep years ago and no one had the heart to wake it. But it wasn't the town that made her chest tight. It was the way that man had looked at her in the heat. Like she was nothing. Like she couldn't possibly be the one to save him. She had seen that look before. Rachel parked beside the shop's warped wooden sign, Monroe Auto Works, EST 1956, and killed the engine. The moment the key turned, the world fell into a hush. She sat there, unmoving, her eyes drifting to the rearview mirror, not to check her reflection, but because of the object tucked into the cup holder below it. The ring. She didn't even wear it today. Not after a day like that. But there it was. A small sapphire set in worn silver. The stone still caught light like it remembered something precious. She reached down, touched it gently. And the memory rose. It was 30 years ago. A dusty orphanage outside Amarillo. She was 8, barefoot, and covered in scrapes from climbing the chain-link fence to watch the cars go by. That's when he came. Not a man then, a boy. Pale, nervous, too clean for a place like that. His shirt was pressed, his shoes too shiny. But his eyes, they were kind. She hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks, not since her mother disappeared and her uncle brought her there. But the boy talked like they were old friends. Gave her half a peanut butter sandwich and told her his name was Brandon. Said he hated ties and preferred comic books. They only saw each other 3 times before he vanished. But on that last day, he pressed something into her palm. "This belonged to my mom," he'd whispered. "But she died. I think it needs a new story." And then he ran before the matron saw. Rachel had never told a soul. She wanted to believe it was real. That someone had seen her, not as a case number or another girl to shuffle through the system, but as someone worth remembering. Worth giving something to. But the next week, the orphanage shut down without warning. One morning, she woke up and the hallways were silent. No more kids. No more Mr. Fielding. Just a note pinned to the main gate and 2 strange men in a black car saying she had to go live with the uncle. She had kept the ring ever since. Rachel opened the truck door and stepped out, the heat pressing against her skin like judgment. Inside the garage, the fan whirred weakly overhead as Luther bent over a carburetor, his shirt stained, his cap pulled low. He looked up as she entered but didn't speak. He didn't need to. She walked past him, wiped her hands on a rag out of habit, and stared at the wall above the tool bench. There was a photo there. Her, age 10, grease on her cheeks, grinning beside a young Luther with his army jacket slung over his shoulder. "Rough day?" he finally asked, not looking up. She exhaled. "The usual." Luther nodded slowly. "White man in a suit." Rachel almost laughed. "Something like that. Broke down in the middle of nowhere. I fix his car, he tries to tip me like I'm his waitress. Then he sees me, sees this," she held up the rag, stained dark, "and I can see the calculation in his eyes. Can't decide if I'm miracle or mess." Luther wiped his hands, leaned against the bench. "You didn't tell him?" "Tell him what?" "That he's lucky you were the one who stopped." Rachel looked at him then, eyes weary. Would it have mattered? The question hung in the air like smoke. Luther reached into his back pocket, pulled out a small folded cloth. He opened it slowly. Inside was a photograph, cracked, sun-faded, of a young woman with high cheekbones and the same defiant eyes as Rachel. She was standing beside a baby blue Chevy Impala, hand on her hip, a grease smudge across her cheek. Rachel froze. "Where did you find that?" "Your mama kept it in the old toolbox. Found it last week." "She looks happy." She was. For a minute. Rachel swallowed hard. Her mother had vanished when she was just 7. No body. No funeral. Just gone. Everyone said she must have run off. But Rachel never believed it. She'd always suspected something darker. Something no one wanted to say out loud. She looked at the photo again. Then to the ring. And something shifted. He looked at it, she murmured. "Who?" "The man. The CEO." He saw the ring. Stared at it like he'd seen a ghost. Luther straightened. "What did he say?" "Nothing. But his hands shook." She paused. "And when I asked if he was okay, He called me by my middle name. Luther's eyes narrowed. He knew your name. No one calls me Simone. They both stood there in silence, the fan clicking overhead, a single shaft of light pouring through the skylight and striking the workbench like a spotlight from heaven. Rachel felt her pulse quicken. Because suddenly, it wasn't just another roadside rescue. It wasn't just another arrogant man with a busted car. It was him. The boy with the sandwich. The boy who gave her the ring. The boy who disappeared the same week her life fell apart. But now he was a man. And he had no idea who she was. Or what his family had done to hers. But she remembered. She had never stopped remembering. And this time, she wasn't going to let it go. He looked at me like I was a stranger, she whispered. But he's the reason I became one. The morning air was thick with heat and grit as Rachel unlocked the shop. Monroe Auto Works had always smelled of oil, rust, and pine-scented air fresheners that never quite masked the years soaked into its bones. She turned on the radio, low volume, just enough to hear the old blues station Luther liked. It settled the air like an old friend pulling up a chair. Rachel reached for the clipboard, started scanning through the day's appointments. Nothing unusual. A few tire rotations, an alternator check. But the last name on the list froze her hand midair. Whitaker. She stared at the scribbled line. Brandon Whitaker. Return service, oil and brake check. 10:30 a.m. Luther stepped in, wiping his hands on a towel. You see it too? She didn't answer. Just nodded slowly. He set the towel down. Coincidence? Nothing feels like coincidence anymore, she said. She stared at the name as if it might rearrange itself into something less impossible. But it didn't. It stayed there. A name from a half-remembered childhood, now scrawled in black ink on the page of her reality. When the clock struck 10:30, the parking lot remained empty. At 10:48, the chime above the door rang softly. She didn't look up right away. She didn't need to. There was a certain sound to wealth entering a room not built for it, the click of expensive soles against concrete, the hush that follows well-tailored discomfort. She felt it before she saw him. He was different today. Less pristine. The jacket was gone, sleeves rolled up. The kind of man trying not to stand out and failing miserably. His eyes scanned the shop, catching the corners, the old photos, the grease-stained counters. And then they landed on her. Their eyes met. He blinked, the way people blink when they're trying to place a memory they're not supposed to have. Morning, she said, her voice neutral. He stepped closer, hesitating. Rachel, right? She nodded slowly. You remembered. There was a pause. Then he said, I thought I'd come in person. I figured I owed you that much. She crossed her arms, studying him. You don't owe me anything. Still, he said, placing his keys on the counter, I didn't expect to break down in the middle of nowhere. You helped me. I wanted to say thank you. She picked up the keys without breaking eye contact. Oil and brakes? He nodded. Give me 30 minutes. As she turned toward the garage bay, she could feel his eyes follow her, lingering. Not just in that way men sometimes did. This felt heavier. Like he was trying to peer through time itself. She slid under the car and began draining the oil. Her heart was drumming again, not fast, but steady, as if it were tapping something loose. She'd worked on 100 cars since she was 17. But none of them had carried this much weight. Above her, she heard his voice again. Have we met before? She didn't answer at first. He crouched beside the car, careful not to stain his trousers. I know this sounds crazy, but, you remind me of someone. Rachel slid out from under the vehicle, slowly, wiping her hands on a rag. She met his gaze head-on. Someone from where? He looked almost embarrassed. A girl I met once. Years ago. At a place outside Amarillo. A group home. My father sent me there for a while, before he passed. Rachel kept her face still. What happened to her? He exhaled. I don't know. The place shut down. One day she was just gone. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked to the tool bench. People vanish all the time, she said quietly. Doesn't mean they're gone. He looked at her hands as she reached for a wrench. Your ring, he said. She paused. What about it? He tilted his head. It's familiar. I think I've seen one like it before. Rachel's fingers tightened around the wrench. Her breath caught for just a second. My mother had one, he continued. Or maybe my grandmother. I just remember, sapphire, silver band. I used to hold it in my palm when I couldn't sleep. Rachel's voice was low. Sounds valuable. It was sentimental. He hesitated. I gave it away once. To a girl. She turned. To a stranger. He looked down. She didn't feel like a stranger. There was a long silence between them. The kind that grows not from absence, but from something sacred approaching the edge of recognition. He broke the silence softly. She used to watch the road through the fence. Always barefoot. Had this defiant look like she owned the dirt she stood on. Rachel's throat tightened. She liked peanut butter, he added with a faint smile. Hated ties. Said she'd grow up and fix cars. She whispered, you brought her a sandwich. He looked up. Their eyes locked. The hum of the fan. The tick of the cooling engine. The world held its breath. Rachel, he said, the name now heavy with memory. It's you, isn't it? She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her back pocket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. Slowly, she unwrapped it, revealing the ring. The sapphire caught the light again, flickering like it remembered too. He stared at it. I don't understand. Her voice shook. You gave it to me, she said. The day before they closed the home. You ran, but not fast enough. I saw the black car. I saw your father. He looked right at me and told them I'd never see you again. Brandon's face went pale. My father? Rachel stepped closer, her voice steady now. He owned that home, didn't he? And he shut it down to erase us. To erase me. Brandon stumbled back a step. No, that can't be. She didn't blink. But it is. And your name paid for everything that came after. The grants. The trust. The Whitaker Foundation. Built on the bones of the kids that place broke. He reached for something, maybe the counter, maybe air. Rachel, I swear. I didn't know. I believe you, she said softly. But her eyes were steel. Now the question is, what do you do with the truth? And as she turned back to the car, he stood there, shaken not just by who she was, but by what she might do next. The sun had climbed higher, baking the parking lot into a wavering mirage. Inside Monroe Auto Works, the air was cooler, heavy with the scent of grease and steel and time. Rachel stood at the workbench, replacing a fan belt with practiced precision, her hands steady, but her mind somewhere else. The shop radio played soft blues in the background, Luther's favorite, low enough to blend with memory. She didn't expect him to come back. Not really. But at 10:47, the shop's door creaked open. The bell didn't ring. It had been broken for months, just another thing waiting to be fixed. She didn't look up at first. Only when the footsteps stopped. Rachel, came the voice, warm, tentative, unmistakably his. She turned. He stood there again. Brandon Whitaker, now dressed down in a wrinkled shirt and jeans, still out of place in the dust of her world. But there was something different in his eyes. Less pride, more searching. "You came back," she said flatly. He nodded once. Couldn't stop thinking about that wrench. She arched a brow, half amused. "Most people don't come back to places where they bled." He smiled faintly. "Most people don't get saved by someone who looked like they'd rather throw a tire iron than help." She almost smiled, but didn't. "What do you want?" she asked. Brandon hesitated, scanning the shop. His eyes paused on the photo wall behind her, old snapshots of Luther and Rachel from years gone by. Graduation day. First car repair. A little girl holding up a greasy spark plug like a trophy. Then his eyes landed on something else. The ring. It was a simple silver band, set with a deep blue sapphire. A little tarnished now, worn by years of labor, but still catching the light in a way that made it seem alive. It was on Rachel's left hand, always had been, since she was 10. "Your ring," he said softly. She stiffened. "What about it?" He stepped closer, slowly. "It looks like one I knew. Years ago. A long time ago." She turned away, busying herself with wiping down the workbench. "A lot of rings look alike." "No," he said. "Not this one. It's unique. My mother had one just like it. Gave it to me before she died. Told me to give it to someone who made me feel less alone." Rachel's breath caught. He continued, voice distant. "There was a girl. At the edge of a field. Behind the fence. She used to whistle. I was only 9, but I remember her like it was yesterday. Wild curls. Eyes that didn't flinch." She said nothing. Brandon stepped closer. "We sat by the oak tree, just once. I gave her my sandwich. She gave me half a smile. And then the next morning, they told me I wasn't allowed to speak to her again." Rachel slowly turned around. Her face unreadable. "And then?" she asked. "I left. My father took me back home. I never saw her again. But I never forgot her." She held up her hand. The ring gleamed. "I remember that tree," she said quietly. "And that sandwich. You didn't even like peanut butter." His eyes widened. A wave of recognition swept through him, slow and staggering. "Rachel," he whispered. "It's you." She nodded. "I never thought you'd remember." He stepped back, as if the world had shifted beneath him. "But, how? My mother dropped me at that home when I was 8. Said she'd come back. She never did." Her voice was steady, but her eyes flickered with old fire. "I was still wearing this ring the day they shut the place down." He looked stricken. "My father said the orphanage had funding issues. He said they were helping the kids. Your father sold it, Brandon. Bulldozed it. Every child scattered. Some to worse places. Some never found again." Her voice dropped. "And your name was on the trust that made it all possible." Silence fell. He opened his mouth, then closed it. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't." "I believe you," she said. Then, softer, "But the truth doesn't care who knows. It just waits." He sank onto the bench, running his hand through his hair. "Why didn't you say something yesterday?" Rachel shrugged. "Because yesterday, I thought you were just another man who thought money could fix anything." He looked up, guilt swimming behind his eyes. "And today?" She looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "Today," she said, "you looked like someone who might finally want to fix what money broke." Outside, a gust of wind blew dust across the lot. The heat shimmered against the hood of his car. Inside, time seemed to pause. Because in that tiny shop, beneath the hum of machines and the memory of a fence that once divided them, two people stared at the wreckage of the past. And something in them both began to stir. She turned back to her tools, but in her heart, a door had quietly opened, and neither of them was ready for what lay behind it. Brandon didn't sleep that night. Back at his luxury suite just outside the city limits, he stared at the ceiling while the air conditioning hummed, sterile and constant. Everything about the room was engineered to be perfect: blackout curtains, temperature controls, espresso on tap, and yet, nothing could quiet the chaos Rachel had unearthed in him. That ring. That name. That tree. It wasn't coincidence. It was a ghost from a life long buried beneath polished boardroom tables and sanitized press releases. He could still hear her voice: "The truth doesn't care who knows. It just waits." The next morning, before the sun had fully broken the horizon, Brandon slipped on an old ball cap, jeans, and a faded gray t-shirt, a far cry from the bespoke suits he was known for. No driver. No assistant. Just him and his guilt rolling down the cracked road toward Monroe Auto Works. But when he pulled into the shop lot, it wasn't Rachel who greeted him. A man sat under the carport, elbows resting on his knees, sipping black coffee from a chipped enamel mug. His eyes followed Brandon calmly, assessing without suspicion or welcome. His skin was deep brown, his beard gray and neat, his movements slow but deliberate. "Morning," the man said. Brandon nodded politely. "Morning. You looking for Rachel?" "Yes. She's out on a call. Old Chevy broke down on Route 9. Brandon hesitated. "Do you work here?" The man gave a soft laugh. "I used to. Now I just haunt the place." He extended a hand. "Luther Monroe. I built this shop with my brother in '82. Rachel's my niece." Brandon shook his hand, surprised at the quiet strength in his grip. "Brandon Whitaker." Luther's eyes flickered. "CEO Brandon Whitaker." Brandon stiffened. "Yes. I see," Luther said simply, sipping his coffee again. "Then I suppose this is more than a casual visit." Brandon shifted, suddenly aware of how small he felt under the gaze of this man. "I met Rachel yesterday. She helped me. Saved me, really. I came to thank her. And ask her something." Luther leaned back, folding his arms. "Rachel's not much for talk. Not unless it matters." Brandon nodded. "I've learned that." For a long moment, the two men sat in silence. The breeze picked up, rustling the wind chimes made of old wrenches and bolts hanging from the awning. Somewhere in the distance, a freight train groaned past. Luther glanced at him sideways. "You remember her, don't you?" Brandon's throat tightened. "I do. From the home. From that summer. I gave her my mother's ring." Luther studied him again, but this time, softer. "You were just a boy. But Rachel, she never forgot." "I didn't either," Brandon said. "But I didn't know what happened after. My father, he erased it all. Shut the place down. Lied to me." Luther nodded, almost to himself. "He did more than that. He erased names. Records. Families. Rachel's mother was caught up in it too." Brandon looked over, startled. "Her mother? She worked at the home. Underpaid. Kind-hearted. One day, she disappeared. They said she stole from the trust. Rachel never believed it. And neither did I." The words landed like stones. "She thought her mama would come back," Luther continued. "Every day, she waited. Every birthday. Every Christmas. Holding on to that ring like it could bring her home." Brandon swallowed hard. "I didn't know. I swear." Luther looked at him again, something unreadable in his gaze. "Maybe not. But you carry the name. And in this town, names matter." Just then, a rumble of tires crunched into the gravel lot. Rachel's truck pulled in, kicking dust. She hopped out, wiping her hands on a rag, ponytail swaying in the wind. She froze when she saw Brandon. "Didn't expect to see you again," she said, closing the truck door. "I came back," Brandon replied. "Not for answers. For truth." She didn't speak. Just handed her uncle the keys, then walked past them both and disappeared into the shop. Brandon hesitated, then followed. Inside, she was already back at the workbench, pretending to be busy. He stopped in the middle of the shop, unsure how to start. "Rachel," he said. She didn't turn. "I talked to your uncle." "Of course you did," she said, flatly. "He told me about your mother." That made her stop. Just for a breath. "I want to help," he added quietly. "Help?" She turned now, slowly. "You think you can walk in here with your guilt and fix a broken past?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But maybe I can start by not walking away again." She looked at him, really looked this time. And something in her eyes flickered. Not warmth. Not forgiveness. But maybe, permission. Outside, Luther leaned back in his chair again and closed his eyes. Inside, something long buried between two children from opposite sides of a broken system began to stir in the dim light and the silence of old tools. And neither of them noticed, under the shop's dusty skylight, the shadow of a woman watching from across the street. A woman with Rachel's eyes. The next morning arrived with the same blistering sun, hanging over the town like a truth too long hidden. Dust swept lazily down the main road, catching in the cracks of shuttered shops and the faded paint of diner signs. But at Monroe Auto Works, something had shifted. The wind smelled different, like change. Rachel stood in the back of the shop, staring at the ring on her finger. The sapphire gleamed beneath a thin film of oil she hadn't bothered to wipe off. Her hands, calloused and worn, trembled slightly as if the weight of memory had finally sunk in. She had dreamt of her mother again, same dream for 20 years. A hallway. A voice calling her name. A door that never opened. Brandon arrived just before noon, quieter than the day before. He didn't ask for her. He waited by the workbench, his presence steady like someone who finally understood they weren't owed anything. Rachel didn't greet him. She just kept her eyes on the ring and asked, "Why did you really come back?" He walked slowly toward her. "Because I didn't know how many people my family hurt until I saw your face." "You knew something," she said, voice low. "I knew my father shut down the home. I was told it was mismanaged. Unsafe. That it was better to forget." She turned. Forget what? Children who clung to each other in the dark. Women who gave their lives to care for them for scraps of pay. His eyes dropped. She stepped forward. "Did he tell you they blamed my mama for the missing funds?" He looked up. "No. She worked herself raw," Rachel said. "Kept that place alive. And when it fell, they used her as the excuse. Said she forged checks. That she ran off. But she didn't run. She vanished. And no one looked." Brandon's breath caught. "My uncle tried," Rachel went on, voice cracking. "But we didn't have lawyers. We didn't have names that opened doors. And me? I was 12. I got moved. And moved again. But I kept the ring. Because it was the only thing that didn't feel like a lie." Brandon stepped closer. "I was 8. They took me out before they shut it down. Told me you were adopted. Said no one remembered your last name. I looked once, years later. Nothing came up." Rachel's laugh was dry. "Of course not. He made sure of that. Your father buried us. All of us. And then built his empire on the silence." A pause. Then she reached under the bench and pulled out a box. "But I didn't stay buried." She opened it slowly. Inside were old files, yellowed paper, newspaper clippings, ledgers marked in pencil and red ink. She placed one in front of him. It was a staff payroll sheet, from the orphanage. Her mother's name circled in ink. She didn't steal, Rachel said. She found something wrong. She tried to report it. I found this file in a locked drawer at the county archives. Took me years. But it was all there, the whistleblower complaint she filed. Never processed. Never followed up. She flipped to a second page, a bank statement with dates matching donation deposits and withdrawals to offshore accounts. Brandon stared. The signature beside the withdrawals was unmistakable. His father's. He staggered back, the truth colliding with the man he had tried to be. Rachel spoke softly now. Your father didn't just shut us down. He made sure every name tied to that home vanished. Except his. Brandon's voice was hoarse. And you've been carrying this alone? She nodded. What else could I do? No one listens to a mechanic in a dying town. His jaw clenched. They will now. She looked at him, unsure. But Brandon turned, opened his phone, and tapped a number. Elaine, he said. I need a press release. Full transparency. I'm coming clean. I want an internal investigation launched today, and tell the board, we're naming every dollar. Every file. And I'm starting with the orphanage. Rachel's eyes widened. I won't run, he said, locking eyes with her. Not from you. Not from what was done. Silence fell between them, but this time, it wasn't cold. It was reverent. A stillness made of broken truths finally laid bare. Rachel exhaled. Her hands, still smudged with grease, let go of the file and reached for the ring. I never took it off, she whispered. Not even when it hurt. Brandon said nothing. He just stood there, not as a CEO, not as a savior, but as the boy who once made a promise beneath a summer tree. The air in the shop felt different now. Lighter. But outside, across the road, a figure watched them from the passenger seat of a beat-up sedan. A woman with streaks of silver in her tightly braided hair. A woman with tired eyes that had seen too much, and never stopped looking. She whispered under her breath, Rachel. Then quietly opened the door. The news spread faster than the summer wind that rolled across the rust-colored fields outside town. By sunset, headlines blazed through phones, desktops, and even the local diner's flickering TV. Whitaker Industries CEO confesses to orphanage cover-up. Whistleblower's daughter unearths decades of buried truth. But inside Monroe Auto Works, there was only the hum of cooling engines, the smell of oil, and the sound of a door creaking open. Rachel didn't look up. She knew that sound, and the hesitation in the footsteps that followed. It was Sheriff Donnelly. His hat in hand. His voice thick. I owe you an apology, Miss Monroe. She wiped her hands with a rag. For what, exactly? He swallowed hard. For dismissing you. For never opening those files when you asked. For treating you like your mama's ghost never mattered. Rachel stared at him for a long beat. Then nodded once. You didn't believe me. He looked away. No. I believed someone else louder. Behind him, old Mr. Green from the hardware store shuffled in, face drawn with quiet guilt. Rachel, when they said your mama stole from that place. I told everyone to stop hiring y'all. I was wrong. Then came the town clerk. The woman who refused to notarize Rachel's petitions. Then the social worker who called her unstable at 16. One by one, like echoes from the past that had finally found their way forward. They didn't bring flowers. They didn't bring excuses. Just eyes full of regret and silence that asked for something deeper than forgiveness. Rachel stood among them like stone. Not cold. Just still. Luther Monroe watched from the corner, arms folded, his weathered face unreadable. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Because Brandon stepped forward. He didn't wear his suit. No press badge. No entourage. Just jeans, a navy t-shirt, and a look in his eyes that said, "I know now. And I came to stay." He held up a worn file folder. "This is everything I found in my father's safe. Records. Letters. The letter your mother wrote to the board, stamped and never mailed." Rachel reached out with trembling fingers, took it from him, and opened the brittle envelope. Inside was the proof that her mother didn't vanish. She was silenced. Rachel's breath hitched. She tried. She screamed, Brandon corrected softly. But no one listened. The room was still. Even the fan above had slowed to a mournful pace. And then a voice cracked through the quiet. "She's still screaming." Every head turned. At the edge of the garage, the woman from the sedan stepped in, the shadows clinging to her like secrets. Rachel dropped the letter. "Ma." The woman nodded, her eyes brimming. "I've been waiting so long to hear you say that." Gasps rose from the others. Even Brandon's breath caught in his throat. But Rachel didn't speak. She walked slowly, like approaching a dream she'd begged for but never expected. "I thought you were dead," she whispered. "I was," the woman said. "To the world. But not to you. Never to you." Tears slid down Rachel's cheeks as she reached out, not for proof, not for explanation, just for the warmth of a mother's hand. They touched. And in that moment, something ancient broke. Something that had held Rachel together like dried sap, brittle and unyielding, melted into something soft, something whole. Luther turned away, quietly wiping his eyes with the back of his arm. No one in the shop moved. Even Brandon stood frozen, his world shifting again, because the woman who stood before him wasn't just Rachel's mother. She was the head nurse. The one who ran the orphanage with dignity. The one who held him when his mother passed and taught him how to pray. "Miss Amelia," he breathed. She turned. "Brandon Whitaker," she said, her voice a soft storm. "You gave my girl a ring. Then you disappeared." He nodded, guilt washing over him. "I didn't know." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm here." Rachel's hand gripped hers tightly. The sheriff stepped back. The others followed, leaving the circle intact, sacred, untouchable. No more accusations. Just silence and the long-awaited return of something broken, becoming whole again. But as the crowd trickled out, Luther remained. He stepped up to Amelia and nodded. "We kept the shop going," he said. "Hoping you'd find your way back." "I found her," Amelia said, brushing Rachel's cheek. "And that's enough." Rachel's heart pounded in her chest. But she hadn't asked yet. "Where were you?" Amelia looked at Brandon, then at the letter, then down. "They told me to disappear, or they'd take you." And with those words, the room turned colder. Rachel stepped back. But before she could speak, Brandon said, "Who's they?" Amelia's jaw tightened. And her answer was barely a whisper. "Your father's board of directors." The room didn't move. The shadows stretched. And outside, a black car with tinted windows rolled slowly past the shop, its license plate untraceable. But Rachel saw it. And something in her face changed. Because she knew. This wasn't over. The days that followed were quieter, but they carried the weight of unspoken words and eyes that lingered a little longer. Rachel stayed at the shop, but something in her had shifted. Not just because the town had turned, apologetic now, soft-footed and humbled, but because the world had tilted back to a place she'd buried. Her mother was home. Amelia didn't speak much about the years lost. She folded laundry with quiet care, scrubbed counters that didn't need cleaning, and sometimes stared at the sky like she was waiting for a sign that it was safe to breathe. But in the evenings, after Monroe Autoworks shut its doors and the last customer drifted away, Rachel pulled out 2 cups of coffee and placed them on the same metal table where her uncle had once taught her how to hold a wrench. And her mother sat across from her, hands wrapped around the mug, like nothing had changed. "Luther still puts too much sugar in his coffee," Amelia chuckled softly. Rachel smiled. "He says it makes him remember Georgia peaches." The old man, seated in the shadows nearby, grunted. "That's 'cause real peaches stopped growing in this town when the mill shut down." They laughed. "Just a little. Just enough." Brandon returned on the 3rd night. He didn't come with cameras or suits. Just a 6-pack of soda and a shy smile. Rachel looked up from beneath the hood of a rusted-out Chevy. "Didn't expect you back so soon." "I figured. I still owe you a spark plug," he said, holding up the part she refused to let him buy the first time they met. She tilted her head. "That was a week ago." "I had to find the exact one," he said. "Some things are worth doing right." He wasn't just talking about engines. Amelia invited him to sit. She didn't say much, but the way she set a glass down for him meant he was welcome. They talked for hours that night. About engines, yes, but also about silence, and loss, and the kind of anger that hardens in the bones when you're denied the truth too long. Brandon listened more than he spoke. And when Rachel finally said, "I used to wonder if you remembered me," he nodded, slowly. "I remembered the ring," he said. "But I never knew what it meant until I saw it again, on your hand, covered in oil." That made her laugh, the first real laugh he'd heard from her, sharp and unguarded. Amelia watched them quietly. Her daughter and the boy who once handed her a promise beneath an orphanage staircase, now adults shaped by everything life had taken and given back. She stood up, her joints stiff. "I'm heading in. Don't stay out too long, Rachel. Tomorrow's early." Rachel nodded. "Night, Ma." Brandon looked after her, then leaned back against the wall. "She walks like she's still carrying secrets." "She is," Rachel said. "But I'm learning, that doesn't mean we can't carry joy too." There was a long pause. Then Brandon reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded photo, aged, yellowed, the edges curled from time. He handed it to Rachel. It was the 2 of them. Children. Standing in front of the orphanage gate. Her tiny hand holding his. The sapphire ring shining like a star between them. "I found it in one of my mother's journals," he said quietly. "She kept everything." Rachel traced the photo's edge with her thumb. Her voice caught. "I didn't think anything like this still existed." "It does," he said. "Just, buried under too many lies." She looked up at him. Not like before, with suspicion or defense. But with something softer. "Why are you really here, Brandon?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Because I was raised with everything, except truth. And you're the only one who ever made me feel honest." Silence stretched between them like a bridge built slowly, carefully. Then Rachel reached out and handed the photo back. "Keep it," she said. "But this time, don't forget who's in it." The crickets sang softly around them, and the warm air carried the smell of grease, honeysuckle, and the beginning of something new. The next morning, Rachel found a note tucked under the windshield of the same Chevy she'd been repairing. Just one line, written in Brandon's careful hand. "If you'll have me, I'd like to help rebuild what my father broke." She folded the note, pressed it against her heart, and for the first time in years, whispered something aloud to no one but the wind. "Maybe, we begin again." But as she stepped inside, she saw her mother sitting by the window, eyes narrowed at the street. "Something wrong?" Rachel asked. Amelia didn't answer at first. Then she said, "There's a car parked across the road again. 3rd time this week." Rachel's smile faded. Because they both knew. The truth may have been uncovered, but the ones who buried it weren't done yet. The wind had changed. Not the loud kind that bends trees or rattles roofs, but the soft shift that carries whispers across small towns and stirs up memories left too long in the dust. Rachel noticed it one morning when she stepped out onto the shop porch. The sky was still the same burnt blue stretch, the streets still empty at sunrise. But something had settled. Like the town was holding its breath. Luther was already out back, tinkering with a busted generator, his head nodding to a rhythm only he could hear. Brandon hadn't been by since the note. He'd left space, the kind Rachel didn't know she needed until the quiet settled in. And Amelia? She sat in the corner of the living room with an old photo album on her lap. The same one Rachel had refused to open for years. Rachel stood in the doorway, wiping her hands with a rag. "You found the box." Amelia didn't look up. It was never really hidden. Rachel crossed the room slowly and sat beside her. The pages turned with a whisper, each one releasing another breath of the past. There were pictures of a little girl with wide eyes and grease-stained overalls. A boy beside her, always grinning, always running. Rachel traced one image with her finger. "You kept all these." "I kept what mattered," Amelia said. Then she closed the book gently. "But pictures aren't memory. Memory, it's what you choose to carry." Rachel leaned back, head against the couch. "Sometimes I don't know what to carry anymore. The pain. The truth. The ring. Him." Amelia was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Let me tell you something no one ever told me." Rachel looked over. Amelia's voice was soft, like a story passed down from the bones. "When you hold on to anger, it keeps you sharp. It gives you something to swing when the world takes everything. But when it's time to build instead of fight, that same sharpness can cut the very thing you're trying to save." Rachel didn't speak. Amelia went on, her gaze distant now, like watching something only she could see. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means letting the pain stop being your compass. It means turning toward what's still whole." Rachel's throat tightened. "What if I'm not ready?" "You're not supposed to be ready," Amelia said. "You're just supposed to show up." The silence between them was sacred, not empty, but full. Like standing inside a church made of everything unsaid. Later that afternoon, Brandon returned. Not with words, not with grand gestures, but with tools and hands ready to work. He walked in, nodded to Luther, and got under the hood of an old Ford without asking. Rachel said nothing. But that evening, she brought him lemonade and left it beside him without a word. And still later, as the sun bled gold into the sky, they sat on the edge of the shop's loading dock. No talking. Just the warmth of metal beneath them and the sound of cicadas buzzing in the trees. Brandon broke the silence. "You think this town will ever forgive me?" Rachel glanced at him. "It's not about the town." He waited. She said quietly, "It's about whether you forgive yourself." He exhaled, like he'd been holding that breath for years. And then, as dusk folded over them like a soft blanket, Amelia stepped outside. Her silhouette framed in the porch light, her voice low but clear. "Brandon," she said. He stood. She looked at him for a long time. "Your father may have built a fortune, but it was Rachel's dignity he tried to steal. And she kept it." Brandon lowered his eyes. "I know." Amelia nodded. "Then don't repay it with guilt. Repay it with honor." He swallowed. "How?" She stepped closer. "By being the kind of man who never forgets the girl with grease on her hands and a sapphire on her finger." Then she did something no one expected. She placed her hand on his cheek, held it there for a beat, and whispered, "And by loving her the way no one ever dared." Rachel watched from the shadows. Something in her cracked, not with pain, but with release. She stood slowly, walked over, and gently took her mother's hand. Amelia looked at her, eyes shining. "I'm not angry anymore," Rachel said. "I know," her mother whispered. "That's how I knew you were ready to be seen." And as the three of them stood there, in the fading light of a town that once forgot their names, the quiet wisdom lingered in the air like perfume from another life. The deepest repair begins not with words, but with presence. Yet just as the stillness seemed to settle, a sound broke it. A car engine, purring low. Unfamiliar. Headlights turned down the dusty street. Luther stepped out from the side gate, frowning. Rachel narrowed her eyes. Amelia's jaw tensed. Because sometimes, when old wounds begin to heal, the ones who made them, come knocking again. The next morning, the air carried a stillness that felt deliberate. Like the world had slowed down just enough for something important to happen. Rachel stood at the edge of the old orphanage grounds, what was left of them. Nothing remained but the skeleton of a fence and the outline of where the garden once bloomed. The building itself had been leveled years ago, swept aside by progress or guilt. But to Rachel, every inch still whispered names. Laughter. Promises never kept. She knelt and placed her hand on the earth, eyes closed. The ground was dry, cracked in places. Yet she could feel something beneath, not roots, but memories. Behind her, the gravel crunched. Brandon. He didn't speak. Just stood a few paces behind her, giving her space. He held a small wooden box in his hands. She stood slowly and turned. He offered it to her. "I found this last night. In my father's storage vault." Rachel took it, opened the latch gently. Inside lay a stack of old photographs and a folded letter, yellowed with time. Her fingers trembled. Brandon's voice was low. He knew. He knew the truth the whole time. That you were here. That I gave you the ring. That we meant something. Rachel unfolded the letter. It was addressed to Eleanor, Brandon's mother. She read aloud. "I've shut it all down. The girl, the boy, the place. They don't belong in his future. He'll thank me when he forgets." Her eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. Brandon's jaw clenched. "I thought I hated him for how he treated me. But this." Rachel held up the photo, two children sitting beneath a tree, their hands covered in dirt and laughter. A sapphire ring on her small finger. She smiled through the ache. "We planted tulips here." "I remember," Brandon said softly. "I didn't even know I remembered." Rachel looked at him, really looked. "And now?" He met her gaze. "Now I remember everything." They sat in silence on the edge of the ruins. Time passed like molasses. After a while, Rachel reached into her pocket and pulled out the ring. The one she never stopped wearing. The one he gave her before the world pulled them apart. She held it out. Brandon blinked. "Why are you?" "I want you to see it," she said. "One last time. Because I'm not keeping it for pain anymore." He took it in his palm, staring at the stone. "You gave me this before you knew what love cost," she said. "And I held on to it long after I forgot what it meant. Do you want it back?" Rachel smiled. "No. I want it to rest." Then she knelt and pressed the ring into the dirt, right where the tulips once bloomed. Her hand lingered on the soil. "This is where the promise began. And where I let it go." Brandon crouched beside her. "Then let me plant something." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a tiny velvet pouch. Inside were tulip bulbs. She stared at them, stunned. "My mother used to keep them in the windowsill," he said. "Said they were for the day we'd come back." Rachel's breath caught. Together, they dug into the earth. Side by side. Planting bulbs where pain had once rooted deep. Each motion silent, sacred, slow. As the sun arched higher, Luther appeared from the road. A lunch bag in one hand, a gentle smile playing on his lips. He didn't interrupt. Just watched them with a knowing that went deeper than words. And when the last bulb was covered, Rachel stood, brushed the dirt from her hands, and said quietly, "This place took everything from me. But now, it gives something back." Brandon looked around. "What will we call it?" Rachel thought for a moment. Then said, "The Garden of Kept Promises." Luther nodded from the distance. "Sounds right." The three of them stood beneath the open sky, surrounded by the ghosts of what once was and the soft stirring of what could be. And in that hush, that breath between before and after, Rachel heard a voice she hadn't heard in decades. A little boy's laugh. Not from memory, but from behind the fence. She turned sharply. A young boy stood there, holding the hand of a woman with soft eyes and a tired smile. Rachel's heart seized. The woman stepped forward. "Is this where the stories used to live?" Rachel blinked. "Yes. And maybe, where new ones begin." The woman smiled. "Then maybe we'll stay." And as they stepped onto the earth where tulips would one day bloom again, Rachel knew the ground had shifted. Not from beneath her, but inside her. Stillness gave way to something else. A heartbeat. A beginning. But just before she turned to leave, Rachel felt a breeze sweep past her shoulder, and in it, the faint scent of tulips, years too early to bloom. She whispered, "Mama." The wind didn't answer. But something in her chest said, "She heard you."